What do you make of all the Banksys appearing on the streets of London?
London's one of the biggest markets for contemporary art. Auctions, the biggest galleries are here. And when we thought about building Rise Art, it was really to enable cross-border transactions for artists. Only about like 5% of the art world transactions are done outside of borders. 1 in 6 UK adults had never even set foot in an art gallery.
How does your outlook as an American expat living in London influence the way you approach art?
What's great about being an expat here is like the ability to learn from other cultures and kind of cherry pick best of things. What I've always noticed in California and growing up was that there was always this sense of anything is possible. People would go out of their way to help you and pay things forward in a way I'm not sure happens in Europe all the time.
Are there other ways that you're getting them more exposure to potential buyers?
One of the collaborations we do, for example, is with Soho House and their Soho Home furniture brand, where we actually do exhibitions in the showrooms around the world.
So what's the most you've ever sold an art piece for?
I don't know if I can tell that.
What advice do you have for an aspiring artist looking to get into a gallery or take their work across borders?
It takes a certain level of passion to be successful as any sort of creative. And if you're super dedicated and driven, that good things will eventually happen.
Welcome to another episode of Cross Border, where we sit down with industry experts, creators, and entrepreneurs facilitating the global exchange of culture. Today, we're here with Scott Phillips, the founder and CEO of Rise Art Gallery in London. Rise is a global art platform that connects artists with audiences around the world. Scott, welcome.
Amazing to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So how did you end up here, running an art gallery in London?
I mean, it's a long story. Like, how long we got? No, I originally grew up in the U.S., originally in Palo Alto, known for being like home of Stanford. And when I grew up there, it was probably a lot smaller than it is today before like all of the .com revolution and tech revolution that we see now. Spent most of my childhood with my parents in publishing, growing up there, but always also seeing the growth of technology, of platforms. So I always knew I wanted to focus on that. Long way around, ended up in Europe for a media business called Red Herring. And it was like really, really a fun time in my career. Got to go run a P&L like in my 20s in France, working out of Paris and covering the technology scenes, media scenes, running a series of conferences, which was really like formative in that. Spent a couple years doing that, then decided I needed to expand my horizons a little bit. Wanted to do an MBA, and at the time in France, I'd met my now wife, Helene, who I was originally going to go back to the U.S., kind of settle in there and go back to California or one of the other universities on the East Coast. But she subtly suggested that if I valued my relationship, I'd consider doing a program a little closer to France. So I ended up at London Business School. Moved here. That was about 17 years ago, and yeah, the rest has been a fun story about London. Doing a couple startups and then starting Rise Art, and that was now over 10 years ago, and it's been really an incredible journey.
Wow. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, lots to unpack.
Yeah, donc tu parles français?
Oui, je comprends quelques mots.
Ah, d'accord, c'est pas mal. On va essayer à faire des quelques mots en français. Donc,
d'accord, vas-y.
So, moving across from California, to Europe, London, Paris, did you have any culture shock upon arrival?
Paris, I think, was definitely like a culture shock for America. And some of it was like professional, just in terms of like, I think in California, everyone's so warm, outgoing, friendly. Like you make friends at work super quick. In Paris, it takes a little bit longer, right? Like it's people do separate their professional and personal life. And I found like that probably one of the trickiest things. Some of my best friends now and people I talk to regular are people that I met in Paris, but it definitely took longer, especially at work, to warm up to people, have them accept you, and probably bring you in outside of a work context than I think the U.S. would.
Well, I've also heard and experienced that something similar in London as well. So which, I guess, is tougher, in your opinion, to break into?
Well, I think for me, London was super easy because I came and went to London Business School. So I was surrounded by a bunch of other international students with like an access of being able to go bother anyone in business or whatever saying I'm a student at LBS. Will you give me 5 minutes? And a lot of people would. So I didn't feel like it was that difficult. But I do think like the first time I worked and did a internship while I was here for a UK company, that was a little bit of a culture shock. Again, just a bit different, and also different formalities. Getting set up with a national insurance number and all that sort of things. It just made the friction a little bit like more difficult than probably what I was accustomed to in the US.
So now, how does your outlook as an American expat living in London influence the way you approach art?
In some ways, like what I've always noticed in California and growing up was that there was always this like sense of anything is possible, right? People would go out of their way to help you and pay things forward in a way I'm not sure happens in Europe all the time. Potentially it's because a lot of people see their friends in the US making a lot of money through, share options, or especially in the startup world, like people see people exiting and having a lot of success. In Europe, it's been a little bit like slower of a progress. So I think there's this eternal optimism in the US that something can happen and that if you work hard and you can make it. And I think that entrepreneurial spirit is a little bit different in Europe, but not to say that it's bad. I think like what I learned a lot and from my UK colleagues, and especially like with Rise Art, is also this sheer sense of like determination and the ability to like kind of stick with it and not let short-term issues and stuff derail or it's like that stiff upper lip thing that the British are famous for. I think actually went like they harness it extremely well, and like I've learned a lot from that as well. So I think like what's great about being an expat here is like the ability to learn from other cultures and kind of cherry pick best of things that I kind of try to use, but also still be true to, where I'm from and that kind of like a little bit more fun loving, optimistic spirit of being from California.
Do you find your Americanness, comes off, abrasive to Europeans sometimes?
I mean, I'd say no, but I'm sure other people would disagree. No, what I would say is that I sometimes need to be careful, right? Like, I think like, sometimes I can say can look at something in a perspective that is not necessarily shared here, and I should, and I try to temper that at times because I think it can make people genuinely feel like sometimes awkward if you're like too enthusiastic, too like, hey, we can go get them and stuff, and you've got to kind of read the tea leaves in the room, so to speak, right? But I also think that the fact that I'm not originally, from England gives me like a certain ability to move freely and kind of not push the boundaries, but feel at least that I can have conversations in a way that are authentic to me, and people will give me credit for that.
That's fascinating. Interesting. Thanks for sharing that. So did you say you have formal art training?
No, I don't. And it's like something that that probably would have served me really well had I just listened to my inner voice at the beginning and saying, maybe this is going to be harder than it is to launch an art business. Now, I think like my formal training, and I've done a lot of it, has always been around publishing business technology platforms. And when we thought about building Rise Art, it was really to enable cross-border transactions for artists and enable artists to kind of develop patronage and also collectors in new ways that they wouldn't be able to from a traditional gallery environment. But at that same time, I think like, the fact that I didn't have that formal art background, it made me really rely on traditional curators, which in some ways has been really good because it has enabled me to take a step back and not be too tied in emotionally to the curation that goes on the site and how things are done. But also after 10 years of now working in this sector, I also feel like I quite understand a lot of the business mechanics and more importantly, really what drives artists and what they believe in for their own practice. And so, it's at to the point now where I do guest speeches at Sotheby's and other like education things. And I think I bring a unique background to this sector in that I come from a different landscape, but I still really empathize with the stakeholders and with the artists that we actually work with.
All right, so you're saying that your skills outside of art actually are adding value to the experience of artists.
I hope so. I mean, you'll have to ask the artists that we work with. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think having different perspectives coming in, but also the humility to understand that we're not going to change everything in the art world, nor do we even really want to. We want to to work within the existing boundaries to help artists do what they want to achieve in new and interesting ways.
So, Scott, what criteria do you use when selecting artists to exhibit?
So on our platform, we have over 1,000 artists, and compared to gallery, that is like absolutely insanely huge. Compared to eBay, it's like nothing, right? So we sit in between. Like, we really try to curate artists in a way that they're professional artists, they're full-time practicing artists, they're doing gallery shows, they've attended a degree program. Like, we really review them on a variety of things. But really, like, at the end of the day, also our curators come up and say, I believe in this artist. And I think that's the important thing for us. We work with artists across all stages. So we have artists that have, had solo shows at the Tate, like Bruce McLean, all the way down to artists who've just recently graduated their MFA or MA programs. We also work across a lot of different artist backgrounds in universities and degree programs, and have a number of different ways that we curate, whether that be like a art prize or working with external curators who recommend some of their artists in their portfolio that they're passionate about. And I think the one thing that for me is really important is that we give a lot of artists, especially at the early stage of their career, the chance to like exhibit on the site, to kind of develop their practice, to have their CV on the site, to have some artworks, to engage with the collectors, to allow us to do some things with their work in terms of contributing to content or an exhibition, online, offline, digital presentations, physical presentations. And for a lot of them, that's a first stepping stone into the art market in a way, right? Like, there's less and less opportunities for artists to get gallery shows, especially outside of their own local markets. I think since 2007, there's been more galleries every year closing than opening. And so I think it's really important for platforms like ours to give newer artists a chance to exhibit their work. Now, not all of these work, right? Like, we have a lot of artists that we have them on the platform. We work with them for 6 months, a year, and it's not the right fit. Either our collector base, it's not something necessary for them, or the artist, like, we feel like the artist isn't developing in the way that we think makes sense for a really long-term relationship. And so we're always consistently refreshing our artist pool. And there's probably only about 10 to 20% of the artists on our platform that we work with regularly in terms of like physical exhibitions or other sorts of presentation format. But we want to give our collector base a chance to explore, see a lot of new things, and a chance for artists just to like engage with the community and give them another platform to share their work.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of engaging with the community, that's really how I came to know Rise Art Gallery. I think it was one of the exhibits you did with South African artist Nelson Makamo.
Yep.
Correct. So this is just one of the ways, right, that you talk about this platform. There's, exhibits, there's digital.
Yeah.
But are there other ways that you're giving artists and getting them more exposure to potential buyers?
Yeah, what I would say is that our platform really is like, we started this to use digital as well as physical mediums to showcase the stories and perspectives of really outstanding artists, really with anyone who wants to take part. And that can be online through digital presentations, through storytelling, through content. It can also be offline. So, through physical exhibitions like the one that you saw in London. We do the traditional white box art gallery exhibitions. We've done art fairs. We also do a lot of collaborations and third-party exhibitions. And I think really, like, what it's trying in every single touch point, what we're looking for to do is really showcase in authentic ways, like help an artist share their story and perspective with anyone who's out there who finds that interesting. And I think that's the amazing thing about art. It allows you to see the world through someone else's eyes. And we're just finding new mediums and platforms in order to do that, and to break down those barriers, especially with first-time collectors or people who wouldn't consider themselves a collector, but are really interested in the art world. I think there's so much to offer people who are kind of curious about this, but don't feel like setting foot in an art gallery is the right place for them, or don't feel comfortable in that mechanism. Really giving them different ways of engaging and discovering artists for themselves.
Are there any artists that stick out to you, or any famous works that inspire you?
I mean, there's so many. And the great thing about being involved in this business is that I find new stuff every day. I'll tell you the first one that I ever actually that made me like get it was a Mark Rothko painting, and it's actually like the Four Seasons ones that's in the Tate Modern. I believe it's the Tate Modern, on the permanently display. And I went into the Tate Modern for a meeting with someone, and they were running late, so I just had like 20 minutes to kill. And so I went into this room. It's like the Four Seasons. It's one box, four works, other side. And up to that point, I'd never really been into Rothko. I was like, yeah, I get it, but I don't really get it. And I read the thing, and I just sat in there for 20 minutes. I was like, wow, this is actually like really incredible. And it's those sorts of moments where you connect with art and you just kind of like something clicks, right? And it's not something that always happens. Like, in fact, like 8 out of 10 times when I look at art and read it, I'm like, this isn't for me. But when it does click, I'm like, wow, this is like something that is really interesting and something that I want to engage with. And that's kind of why I'm so passionate, especially working with artists at the earlier stages of their career, is like giving them mediums to share and promote and take risks and share their story. I think is something that's really, really quite fun.
So aside from Hélène, what was the reason? What else made you realize that London was the place to start Rise Art Gallery?
Well, I think like London's a great place because if you can cut your teeth and do something in London, you can pretty much, I think, go anywhere, because London's one of the biggest markets for contemporary art. Especially it's also auctions. The biggest galleries are here and that. And so, if you cut your teeth and you're able to do something that resonates with both collectors and also with artists here, I think that's something that you can take anywhere. That said, I think it's one of the tougher places because there's so many substitutes options. It's hard for a new entrant like us to really make a mark. So I think it's like it's really been a great opportunity though for us, especially on the supply side, to meet with artists, to meet with curators, to really feel like the atmosphere of a city, and to take a lot of those things as inspirations for our own business and how we communicate and work with our collectors.
And now, I guess going back to Nelson and South Africa for a minute,
absolutely.
What inspired you to start looking at Africa and supporting and working with African artists?
So I don't usually say that I would classify, like I never tell my team like, let's find more African artists, or let's like focus on this. Like, really what I want to do is find like amazing artists and help them tell their stories and present themselves. And I think sometimes we do a disservice to be like, oh, we want to promote this artist because they're like an African artist. No, like I want to promote these artists because they're amazing artists, right? Like, and I want to help tell their story and take it beyond their own local barriers, their own local boundaries, to help them like share their stories, their perspectives with collectors around the world. So, Nelson's a prime example. Like, we started actually like something in 2019 called the Rise Art Prize. And we had, as judges, we had everyone from Gavin Turk to Sir David Bailey. We did it with the Financial Times, and we basically pooled up artists from all over the world and allowed them to submit. I think we had something like 15,000 artists submitting. It was something like a huge number. I basically killed the team, like trying to whittle it all down, and I probably wouldn't do it that way again. But because of that, we worked with curators all around the world, and actually that's how we started our relationship with Nelson. So that was like 2017, 18. He came through that platform. He actually won a prize through that. We continued the dialogue, and now I've done, I think we've done like 3 shows with him, 4 shows, solo shows, 2 in London, presentation in New York, publications with him. So it's something that, it's like I said, we work with maybe 1,000 artists, but as these artists filter, like with someone like Nelson, it's become a much more like deeper relationship, something that we work very regularly with the studio and his team. And it's something that, I think we help each other kind of and learn from each other the more we do things. So this was the 3rd show. I think it was really like a fun collaboration to do. Did a publication around it, so I was really pleased with it. And I think as it's really fun to see these relationships grow deeper roots, and thinking about like longer term how you work with an artist, because I find it quite fun to grow together and understand how each other's works.
So it sounds like you're taking art across borders.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, that's our goal. Like, one of the reasons why we launched the company is that we saw like, only about like 5% of the art world transactions are done outside of borders. So most of the time, it's local artist sells, to local collector via local high street gallery or gallerist. But these guys have like amazing Instagram followings, and they like are not, they don't think of themselves as a local artist. They think of themselves as someone who's like, doing something that's relevant for collectors around the world. And so I think, the big opportunities, like at the high level, of course, like big galleries around the world will take their, the artists to freeze or to show all around the world at fairs and that, but like, or they have galleries around the world that they can do exhibitions across that. But most galleries just don't have those resources. And so for us, it's around finding these physical and digital like ways of telling stories to start to actually like help artists like expand their collector base around the world, just not and outside of their local markets.
So you've worked on a number of collaborations to make art more accessible,
Yeah.
right? Can you talk about how you're doing that through interior design?
So I guess first, like when you say accessible, like what do you mean by accessible? Like what's your, like, is art accessible?
Is art accessible? It depends on who you are and where you're from.
Yeah.
Can you go down to Art Basel and buy the paintings that you want?
Yeah.
Do you get invited to art galleries, and do you get invited to exhibitions to meet artists? Are you in the spaces, and do you have access to art pieces that are worth spending thousands of dollars for? I think that's how I would answer the question.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on who you are.
Yeah. Because to me, like accessibility, sometimes like it gets thrown around in the art world a lot. To me, it's maybe the wrong word a little bit, because I think a lot of art is accessible. I think the Tate does amazing jobs. Museums like allow their collections to be accessed around the world. There's plenty of ways that you can engage, especially in a city like London, like with art anywhere you want. Yet we did like a survey that showed like 1 in 6 UK adults had never even set foot in an art gallery. So it's kind of like, why, right? Like, and I challenge the thing of like art is not accessible. I more think actually it's like, we haven't figured out in the art world necessarily how to make art engaging beyond a very limited subset of collectors who already feel welcome into the traditional gallery model. And I think personally that the way you can make art more engaging is by making it a little bit more collaborative and fun, and to take art outside of traditional white box galleries and find other ways that are authentic experiences that, artists feel like that this is something that I'm excited about doing, but that also collectors feel like they can engage with that without having to feel like it's outside of their normal boundaries and normal experiences and the way they live their lives. So one of the collaborations we do, for example, is with Soho House and their Soho Home furniture brand, where we actually do exhibitions in the showrooms around the world. So, they've got 6 showrooms in the UK and the US. And right now we've got, I'll get like an example in London too, on King's Road, and also in Westbourne Grove. We've got a handful of artists, and we are actually doing exhibitions there around the theme of dwellings. So it's about around how artists respond to their home environment when they're actually working, and how that influences their own practice. And I think that's a really interesting way of having artworks on the walls in an environment that people can engage with, but it's also something that can be hands off. They can look at it decoratively, when there's nothing wrong with that. But when they find something that they actually like, they can investigate more. We have all of the artist bios, all of these sorts of things, and you can actually purchase those works as well. So I think it's a really interesting way. The artists like it because it's done in a thoughtful way that isn't just throwing their works up on the wall, indiscriminately. We still tell their stories, we tell their perspectives. And I think that's really important for them to treat their art with that level of respect. But also it's about giving people a way of experiencing it outside of a traditional thing. And we have a lot of people who start their collections through like partnerships like that enable people to actually discover artists and kind of live through their experiences. And I think that's super rewarding that someone can discover it in that sort of context, and then start to come through and experience it more broadly, either through our site or our partners.
Wow. I think that's a genius collaboration, and very smart way to bring people in. Because I think back to the moments where I've been close to, purchasing an art piece, and they've actually been in someone's home.
Yeah.
When they introduced me to an artist and like a picture that they've gotten, I'm like, wow, that was beautiful. And, I go to my fair share of galleries, but I think when I'm at a gallery, I assume that it's out of reach for me. But when I'm, at someone's home and they're showing me a piece that they're excited about, I think it just makes it seem a bit more accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, I think some of that is just nuts. Like others of it like makes sense, right? Like, there's this whole thing of protecting artists, especially when it comes to like secondary transactions and people who flip and pump up prices artificially, and that can destroy an artist's career if suddenly like people get burned or that in the secondary market. And so I understand sometimes when artists or galleries want to be a little bit more discriminate about who they sell works to and how. But I also think by not sharing things like in a basic way, like pricing, or allow people to feel like they can ask these sorts of questions, that you make people assume that it's out of their reach when often it's not. There's a lot of works that you can get through galleries in the low thousands of pounds that are, I think, and editions for in the hundreds of pounds that I think more people, if they realize that it was in their reach, probably would engage a little bit more with. So I think there's more work to be done for the whole industry in terms of transparency, in terms of like making art a little bit more engaging and helping people opt in. And I think that's underway. The internet's helped a lot of that, all these things. And I think you'll see more and more galleries experimenting with different concepts beyond the white, the standard gallery presentation to help share the stories of the artists that they work with.
Well, actually, speaking of pricing, that's a good point. I've been on the Rise Art website, and there's a good range. There's definitely a good range on there from a few hundred to a few thousand, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely accessible. So what's the most you've ever sold an art piece for?
I mean, I don't know if I can tell that. No. Look, we sell mostly in the primary market. So we have artworks on the site that go up to 100,000 pounds, something like that. And we've placed works between that 50 and 100,000 pounds through sites, sometimes without even knowing the collector who buys it, which always blows me away because I always thought there was a glass ceiling, and each year on the internet that seems to transition. But I would also say that, look, a lot of our works sell for a couple hundred and up. So it's like we don't want people to feel put off by pricing, or that you can't get involved just because you don't have the budgets to become a quote unquote serious collector now. But I do think that there is something that as we do more and more, we have collectors who want to continue to graduate and start collecting, whether it's for for a variety of different reasons. And I think that like as some of our artists continuing to grow stronger and stronger, that glass ceiling continues to grow up. So I would imagine in some point we'll do secondary sales, we'll do placements, and and I think that we can have a site that exists that does both the the entry level and more aspirational like purchases and one under one brand.
So Scott, what are some emerging trends among artists and collectors in the industry today?
I mean, I think for me, the one trend that I've seen is people's willingness to experiment in new ways, whether that's with brands like we discussed before, or with different ways of displaying and engaging with art. I think that and it started in COVID. You could see like all the galleries rushing to put up digital websites and starting to have a little bit more transparency. I think that is just going to continue to evolve, right? Like this art world isn't going to stay an island forever where, people are okay with just having everything being like hidden and something that, you need to be part of this club. I think like that was okay to an older generation, but especially as younger collectors like mature and and start to really engage deeper with collecting, and that they're going to demand to experience ways the same way they experience other items and products and services. So I don't see why there won't be more transparency in this industry. And I think there's a lot of opportunities in that for dealers and to do things both online and off in new and kind of interesting ways that are a little bit more experimental. And probably not all of the stuff that we do will work, but I think that that's what's fun about it. It's about, coming from first principles. Like, is this in the interest of the artist? Is this something that's actually like authentic? And then when we look at different collaborations and things, we always look at it through that lens, because if we do something that artists get super excited about, then to be honest, we get their best work, we get their attention, we get them wanting to promote it, and it makes everything else easier. And so I think that there's going to be more opportunities like that. And I also think that like artists are going to take more probably control of their own practice and rely less and less on a traditional gallery relationship. And by that I mean, there'll be, I don't know that there's always a reason to just trust your practice with one gallery. I think there's certain situations where I think it makes complete sense. But for a lot of artists, especially savvy ones that, have a decent Instagram profile, have like collectors who they engage with directly with, it's like they have this opportunity to take their practice in multiple different ways. And, there's a lot of galleries that just don't have that ability to expand globally. And, I think artists are going to start to really look at that trade-off that they want to be doing and try to do things that are a little bit more out of the box more frequently.
Well, are you suggesting that technology may just help, artists connect directly with their audiences?
I think that will happen. I think there's also a thing of the operational logistics for an artist to be managing their entire like funnel and going directly to collectors is like a real chore. And I know that because we do that ourselves. And, you've got everything from managing customs, shipping, operations, logistics, returns, you name it. And so I think like artists are going to want to choose what they actually want to control. But I do think the artist brand and where they, the artist should, like, I think savvy artists are taking more control of their practice and deciding on how they want to do things rather than relying on a third party to do everything in their interest. But like I said, there are times where having a dedicated exclusive relationship with a gallery makes complete sense. And I don't discourage that. I just think that like, every artist will have something different and different reasons for things. And I think that now, especially as more is going online, that there's a lot of opportunities for artists to take more control of their own practice.
So, I mean, I guess we're talking about, kind of the tailwind supporting artists, right now. But are there any challenges that artists and gallerists are facing right now?
Yeah, tons of challenges. Like the art world's like always facing challenges. And I mean, that's the thing is any cultural or creative sector, like, the more things change, the more they remain the same, but not really, right? Like things are always evolving. And I think, if you look at recent like auction results in London or the art fair market or the general press, they'll tell you like, hey, the art world's like a little bit in decline, right? Like the auction results aren't as strong. The strength in the art market is going away. It's harder to make sales. I think it's just shifting a little bit. There's different people who are doing different things. There's some artists that are absolutely like doing amazingly well. There's other artists that are really struggling, and that's always going to be the case. But in terms of global challenges for the market, I do think like there's certain things with like we touched on before, like transparency, accessibility, all of these things with engagement that I think generally are going to need addressing by people. And savvy galleries are going to find new ways of interacting with collectors, especially as a new generation of collector comes online.
So a little off script, but I'm wondering, what do you make of all the Banksys appearing on the streets of London and then disappearing? I mean, stolen.
Yeah.
What's going on with that?
I mean, I understand why they're stolen. People see they can make a quick buck and and take it off the wall. Look, my own impression with Banksy is he's been had a tremendous impact on bringing new people into the art world. And I think that's incredible. Like anytime he transcends the traditional art collector to general population, who, are excited to see new things come onto the scene. And I think like historically he's done some extremely strong things that are really unique and new in the world. So I applaud everything that he's done. I think it's incredible. Artists, the new things that have come around London, like my own take is that they're just a fun way of getting people, the last 2 years in England, everyone loves talking down England and inflation highs, growth low, like politics has like its difficulties, but at the end, there's a ton of strengths, and I think that really, like, there needs to be more optimism in the discourse here. And I think that if anything else, like the Banksy animals around London was just fun, and there's nothing wrong with fun. There's nothing wrong with decorative in the art world if it makes people talk and gives people a little bit of joy.
What do you think of NFTs? They tried to make art fun for a bit, and they were successful, in their heyday. Fell off since, but what do you think about that? And how maybe tech might continue to play a role in art.
I think NFTs, like I know it's like now like not like the hottest of takes, but I think NFTs are still like super interesting. I just think for an artist that really uses the medium to its best advantage. it's like anytime some sort of new technology or things come in, like there's people who use it really well and use the medium for what it's designed to, and then other people who just use it as like a derivative for their own thing. I don't think, for example, painters who just like reproduce things on like a print is like very interesting. But I think printmakers who use the medium for like their, you know, their entire discourse and actually use it to its advantages, to the full advantage of it, like they're doing something that's using the medium really well. And I think that's totally valid. So the same way with NFTs, like there's like, you know, derivative projects, but there's some really strong artists who, you know, are generative artists using the medium, what it's designed for. And I think those artists, like when we look back in 10, 20 years, will be like commended to the same way as other artists in different media. So, you know, I still have a collection of some NFTs. There's some guys who are producing NFTs and generative art that I think are really incredible artists. But I think the overall sector of it got way too overheated, and it was more about the investment and speculation driving it than it was about the art or the value. So I think anytime you have that, then obviously like you're going to have a bubble, and people are going to, you know, also like a lot of people will exit and trash the whole sector. So probably these artists now have an uphill climb to get back to where they were. But I think there's still some really strong artists in that space. So I don't think it's you need to throw everything out.
You bring up a good point, the one I want to just touch on really quickly, and that's, you know, the balance between commercial viability and commercial success and artistic integrity, right?
Yeah.
How do you strike the balance between getting too big?
I think for every artist, it's different, right? For some artists, like the commercialness is the heart of the practice, right? So the reality of like, oh, you can't be a strong artist without being commercial, I don't think necessarily makes sense. I just think that actually, like, you have to take a step back with each artist. It's like, well, what is the point behind their work? Does their work have any other meaning than beyond the decorative element to it? And when that starts to cease and it doesn't have a like strength beyond like the technical ability, so to speak, I think the longevity usually and the interest tends to be a bit skin deep as in and of itself. That said, you know, I think that there's nothing like to be ashamed about having something that's commercial. Yeah. Right. And so I just think that every artist, depending on what their goals are, as well as what stage they are in their practice, like has to always kind of like, you know, decide what they want out of their next stage in it, and be really driven towards that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that insight. And I guess my final question on this, it's been a fascinating discussion. What advice do you have for, you know, an aspiring artist looking to get into a gallery or take their work across borders?
I think, first of all, it's like any creative pursuit. You talk to, you know, anytime I talk to a creative, whether they're like, you know, film producer, whatever they're doing, right? Like they're just so, like the good ones are just so driven. Like it's like what they're doing. And he's like, I'll use an example is like Nelson, because you came to that show, right? Like there's some artists that produce works for shows. There's other artists that just produce. And having spent time with Nelson in his studio with what he's doing, he's just always pushing his boundaries. He's never happy. He wants to see how can he build his practice in the next 20 years. What boundaries can he push? What, you know, what's in it for him? I don't think he's never going to feel like he can retire. Like he's never going to feel like, you know, his job's done. And I just think that like it takes a certain level of passion to be successful as any sort of creative. And if you're super dedicated and driven, that good things will eventually happen. But it really takes like that drive and dedication, because no one's going to give it to you. And, you know, it's not going to be handed to you. And if it is because you stumble on something, like that can be fleeting. But I think, you know, when you know you're an artist and it drives you more than anything, like, and you can spot them quite easily, then, you know, I think that's just my recommendation is just, if you really want to be an artist, you got to work like, and be like, it's like anything else, you got to work extremely hard and be so passionate about it that no one's going to tell you not to.
Well, glad to hear that, you know, that's consistent advice even in the art world, right? So
yeah, I think so. And it goes for us. It's like, you know, we've been going for 10, 12 years. And what keeps me excited about running a tech business and platform and stuff, it's not really the money. It's like the fact that we get to work with artists to help them enable projects and things that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise, and that's quite cool. It's quite rewarding when we pull it off, right? But the reward's kind of in the journey sometimes, right? Not the end result. And if you find something like that, and fortunately I have with this business, then you're able to still get up and get excited about it every time when you go into it. And if that spirit leaves, I think you're probably then in the wrong line of work, right? Because that's when you get burned out. That's when you don't give 100%. That's when you're like, hey, I'm ready for something new. And yeah, I think that's not a good place to be to try to push through.
Exactly right. Well, that's great advice, Scott. Thank you so much. And so, where can we find you, and what do you have coming next to Rise Gallery?
Yeah, so you can find us on riseart.com, and we've got a lot of interesting collaborations and partnerships coming up. We've got I think maybe an airline project coming up, a whiskey project coming up. So we've got a lot of fun things. And in 2025, you'll see like a lot more physical and digital presentations. So we've got a few hybrid online shows that are offline, a few things coming up in the gallery. So just go to Rise Art and we'll tell you all about it.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, that's great stuff. I'll keep an eye out on the website, and I'll also stop by the gallery.
Yeah, please.
Well, thanks for joining us. Thanks for stopping by the podcast. Great conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure, and thank you.
Yes, thank you. And thanks to Nelson for bringing us together.
Yeah, amazing.
So thank you all for joining us for another episode of Cross Border. This has been Kay sitting down with Scott Phillips, founder and CEO of Rise Art in London. Be sure to give us a follow, subscribe, and give us a like. We'll see you next time.